Let's start. It is very rare that a Norris Trophy winning defenseman gets traded, but Erik Karlsson, it's not a shock. This has been known for a while that he wanted to get traded. The Pittsburgh Penguins were interested, and they finally got themselves Erik Karlsson on the back end. They got rid of a lot of salary in doing so, and Jeff Petrie and Granlund and Casey DeSmith. They needed Montreal to help out. What do you make of this three-way deal?
Fascinating deal. It went down, not to pat myself on the back, but almost exactly as I said it would maybe a month ago, which was the Pittsburgh Penguins, essentially the Carolina Hurricanes were another team. There were a bunch of teams that had been in the mix, but it had said to the Sharks, really, if you're looking for us to take Karlsson off your hands, we'll do it, but we're not going to give you much. And when you consider, cap hit, you can't put it aside because it's such a big part of the deal. Yep. But the fact that the Sharks retained 13%, took on a bunch of bad contracts or contracts that other teams were looking to move, and only got one first-round pick in return, there really isn't a whole lot there to like for the San Jose Sharks. And we can talk about the Sharks in a second. I certainly understand it from Pittsburgh's perspective. They are trying to maximize the window that they do have. I think in the long run, they've probably set themselves back a bit in terms of trading first, second round picks, but they're trying to win within the window that they have and the term and structure that they have. And I think that's exactly what Kyle Dubas promised to Fenway Sports Group when he stepped in. So the Penguins are fascinating. I'll be real curious to see how it works with two right shot defensemen of that caliber on one blue line in Karlsson and Letang. Be really curious to see, is Karlsson running PP1? How is this going to work? Letang's been doing that forever in Pittsburgh. And it's a fascinating bet. They've got 4 players on their roster that are 35 or over. They have 8 guys on their roster that are north of 30. And the over 35 crowd doesn't actually include Karlsson, who's 33 and knocking on the door of that. So it's Crosby 35, Malkin 37, Jeff Carter 38, and Chris Letang 36. Then you've got Karlsson 33, Lars Eller 34. I mean, this is one of the older rosters we've ever seen, Jay, at least in the salary cap era. And they've just added 100-point defenseman to their team. But to kind of really sum up my thoughts on how I feel about this trade, I think the team that, if I were ranking the 3 teams in order of who won from this perspective right now, it's the Montreal Canadiens.
Interesting. See, I understand why Pittsburgh, and I saw a lot of, people reacting to this trade. Oh, the Penguins are done. The Penguins were kind of stuck in a situation that Sidney Crosby's really good still, right? Chris Letang had a great year. If Jenny Malkin had a really good year, their depth guys were the problem in Pittsburgh. And so,
they just further eroded that depth.
Well, but did they? Because Jeff Petrie didn't have a good season in Pittsburgh, right? Casey DeSmith, I think he's easily replaceable. Granlund was why Ron Hextall and them needed to make that trade is mind blowing to me. I never understood it at the time. I thought it was a terrible trade to take him on at $5 million. Never mind just the player, but then $5 million price tag I thought was delusional at best. So I look at them now, getting rid of Granlund, who did nothing for them. Petrie, who Karlsson's better than Petrie. And so you get rid of DeSmith. Now they gave up some picks for sure. So that's obviously a concern. But Pittsburgh, I think they felt like, well, we're going to be knocking on the door to be a playoff team the next few years with Crosby and them. We're not just going to erode. And I didn't think they're not where Chicago's been the last 4 years with Kane and Taves and those guys. They're not that bad. So I can see why they said, hey, we got to take one final swing here. We're going to get Erik Karlsson. He's 33. He's elite. And I know everybody says, well, Burns and Karlsson didn't work. That's true. But San Jose wasn't very good either when they were together. Pronger and Niedermayer, they had no issue with it. We can go, there's been lots of other teams that have had 2 elite the same shot defenseman and had lots of success. So,
and they did their homework. Like they
yeah.
brought Chris Letang into this process, as far as I know. Not only did they get the green light from him, he was apparently excited. And I'm assuming at some point he also talked to Erik Karlsson as part of this process to sort of talk through it all. So they're well aware. I think here's my thing. Like, you take a Penguins team that didn't have any cap space to begin with. And I understand what a lot of people have said about, oh, look at all of the guys that Kyle Dubas has unloaded. And in fact, I think they've changed out 8 players already from their last game of the regular season. And they offloaded the Petrie contract, which wasn't great. And of course, the Granlund deal and Jan Ruda, who didn't really seem to fit there. But the reason I think they finish in second place in terms of how I grade out the trade right now is because they still have a 33-year-old Erik Karlsson who is elite, but at a $10 million cap hit for the next 4 seasons. And I just think there's a lot of risk that goes into that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the salary cap going up significantly will make that 10 million cap hit not as egregious for them. They're
it's the highest on the team. Like, he immediately still is the highest paid player on the team by a pretty significant margin.
Yeah. But he's also like, he had an unreal year. Now, I'm not saying he can score 100 points again, but I wouldn't be surprised if Erik Karlsson's an 85, if he's a top 5 scoring defenseman in the league. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And I just think if I look at just on paper, and I agree, cap it, but on paper, they got rid of 11 million, right? In or close to it in Granlund, Petrie, and DeSmith. So I think Karlsson, just as a player, is going to give them more than what Granlund and Petrie gave them.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm just saying, you took a team that struggled with depth and they didn't struggle with elite players. Yeah, you've added another significant weapon, but you've still taken away from other parts. And to be fair, Kyle Dubas did add to that team depth-wise. Well, just in the summer. Mm-hmm. Like you did add Achari and Lars Eller and Riley Smith. Like, those guys have now been brought into the mix. Ryan Graves, like that's a totally different looking team. I guess here's the other part that I struggle with the Penguins. And frankly, like, we need to have a larger discussion about the Sharks right after this. But does this vault the Pittsburgh? This is a non-playoff team from last year. It's one thing to take a step forward and say, okay, we think they're a playoff team next year, which I think I would nod my head yes and agree with. But does this, Erik, this is the key question, does this Erik Karlsson trade make the Pittsburgh Penguins a Stanley Cup contender again? And what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're a contender, but I think they've got the potential, because they've still got all the Stanley Cup experience with Crosby and Malkin and Letang and other guys, that you get to the dance with them, anything can happen, right? So I wouldn't put them as a top 5 team, Frank, but I would say they might be a top 12, top maybe 13, 14, and then they got a chance.
Okay, you got to get it, like, you got to get in to have a chance. So that's, I guess, you could say that about any of the 16 teams. But, like, let's take a look at some of the other teams that have sort of been in that wheelhouse previously. The New York Islanders, they had gone to 2 Eastern Conference finals with that core. With them getting in as the 7 seed last year, does anyone take that team seriously as being a contender? Did anyone look at the Winnipeg Jets in the 8th seed this year and say they're a true contender? I'm just saying, just because you get in doesn't mean you're a contender. There's a big difference in tier, and I'm just not ready to put the Pittsburgh Penguins with Erik Karlsson in that group yet. Yeah, no, that's fair. I don't mind this trade for them. Montreal, I can see why you see some upside for them potentially. Like, they got rid of some guys that they didn't want anyway. So, and hey, maybe they're hoping Jeff Petrie can play like he did in Montreal, where I think he's probably had the most success in his career. They're actually I'm pretty sure they're gonna move Jeff Petrie now.
Yeah. Well, he wants to be back in the US, does he not?
So yeah, so he requested a trade from the Canadiens a year ago, and they obliged and sent him to Pittsburgh. And this time around, I think a lot of his issue with playing in Montreal was pandemic related.
Okay.
But this, just because you fast forward a year doesn't mean he necessarily wants to go through that again. So basically what they can do now is, because Pittsburgh already retained 25%, they can retain 50% of that and knock him down to essentially 2.3 million.
Basically 2.4.
And now all of a sudden Jeff Petrie at 2.4 becomes a really interesting piece.
Yes.
So if you look at it from a flip perspective, they got a really nice flippable asset in Jeff Petrie. Casey DeSmith is someone that if he wins the job over Caden Primo, he's there. And if not, even so, he could also make Jake Allen expendable if they wanted to make a trade on that front, a really reasonable cap hit. And they get a second round pick to dump off Mike Hoffman's deal, which they were dying to do anyway.
Yeah.
At what point did the Montreal Canadiens lose any part of this deal?
No,
what's one negative thing you could point out about the Canadiens?
Yeah, no, they made some good moves. I'm not sure they're any better or worse, but if they can move Petrie, I will say this, Frank, about Montreal. I saw everybody talking about Caden Primo. Samuel Montembeault was pretty good down the stretch, and then he went to the Worlds. I wouldn't be stunned if he comes into camp and surprises some people, right? And they have a glut of goaltenders. I think there's no doubt in my eyes that Montreal could lose a goalie on waivers this leading into the start of the season.
Well, I think this Casey DeSmith was just extra insurance. And I just this is the way I look at what Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes have done in Montreal, is they have taken a series of small victories and they've stacked one up upon the other and stacked and stacked and stacked. And that's how you win.
Yeah, I think there are ways away.
They're not grand slam home runs,
no.
But when you stack victory upon victory, you put your team in a really strong position.
Now the San Jose Sharks, there's obviously they're hoping that they can move those guys at the deadline this year or next year, right? I don't see anybody taking Granlund this year for sure. He's going to have a really good year and a half in San Jose.
I mean, right? if he comes back and has a 60-point season, they could retain half and you could move him for sure.
But if he has 60 points in San Jose, man, I'll tip his hat to him, because I'm curious on where their offense is going to come from.
Will you eat cat food?
Cat food is one of the most disgusting things ever, man. And I loved watching the guys eat it. But, even though I loathe it that much, Granlund, 60 points, yeah, I'll eat cat food, a scoop of it for sure, because I don't think there's any chance he's scoring 60 points.
Okay. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, you can write it down.
Could you just tell me what exactly the San Jose Sharks are doing? Look, I get that this
Frank,
had to be done. I
Yeah.
get it. I get it had to be done. Erik Karlsson wanted out. They needed the flexibility to get off of that $11.5 million for the next 4 years. But they took on some shit contracts that no one wanted. I have no idea what they're doing.
Well, I think they're going to look and say, we're hoping that Mike Hoffman is going to get he could get first unit power play time in San Jose, and maybe he scores some goals. And, at the deadline this year, we move him and maybe get a pick and something else like that, because they got 2 firsts and 2 seconds next year. That's it. So they're they've already missed the playoffs, Frank, 4 years in a row. And I'm really sorry,
Not just
Sharks
missed
fan.
the playoffs,
yeah,
lottery territory for 4 years.
I don't see them in improving. Erik Karlsson was their biggest offensive weapon. And now
they've just made weird trade after weird trade.
Yeah.
I don't know. Explain to me the Anthony Duclair deal.
Another guy, I think that they feel he allows them, it's like they're sending mixed messages here, Frank.
Are we competing or are we not?
Yes.
That's all I'm asking is what is, I don't know. If you want to move the pieces around the chessboard or whatever it is that you want to make a bunch of bets about, hey, maybe we can flip this guy. Like, good on you. Like, for sure. Are they rebuilding? Or are they trying to be somewhat competitive at the same time?
I can't do it.
Look, I have a good friend of mine who says all the time, you can't suck and blow at the same time. I just don't know what the Sharks are doing. And I don't want to be graphic. I'm just saying, like, are they trying to be 22nd place? Like, what's the ceiling here? What are you going after?
Honestly, when I look at their roster, so Granlund, Hoffman, I like Anthony Duclair as a player. I think he's a really good player. And at a $3 million cap hit, I think he has the most value at the trade deadline amongst their UFAs. There's no question. But like Oscar Lindblom at $2.5 million last year, that was a terrible signing, and it's not looking any better. Like I don't know what direction they're going, Frank.
They don't have a flyer on Philip Zadina. Sure, you sell them on the opportunity to play. I get it, but what are you trying to mine here? What are you trying to do? Like, what is your objective?
Their defense core, I honestly don't believe they have a top pair defenseman on their team. And that's okay. Like, you're a rebuilding team. They don't have a top pair defenseman. So some guys are going to have to play above their talent level at this point. And so there's going to be some tough nights.
The best they have, you're right, is a number 3. Yeah,
no question. So, but then they've been adding guys that they think can help them offensively. And I'm like, okay, so I don't know. There's a mixed bag here of maybe they're going to bring in Eklund and some other guys and say, we just want some veterans around so our young offensive player can at least feel some offensive mojo. It's the only thing I can think of.
Mojo. I mean, what? So give me a compelling reason to watch the San Jose Sharks. At least this year, you could say it was Karlsson.
Yeah. Well, there's not much. And I'm very curious. Logan Couture has 4 years left at $8 million. And I know that he has like a 3-team no trade list or something. And it's like, I wonder if he expands that in the near future, because there's a guy who, since he entered the NHL, Frank, like his first 10 years in the league, man, like the Sharks are one of the best teams. They're competitive all the time. Yeah. And Logan Couture is one of the best playoff performers we've seen in the last decade. Look at his numbers. I think he's got the second most points or goals or something in the last 10. Like, he was good for a real good stretch there when he's in the postseason. So I got to think at some point he's going to follow in the footsteps of Erik Karlsson and say, hey, I want to be out of here. He hasn't thus far, but I got to think it's not far behind.
I think he's open to it.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
Like, he hasn't asked for a trade as far as
I wouldn't. No, but I think just like Karlsson and just like anyone else that's been in the league for a while, Couture's already 34. He's got 4 years left on his deal at $8 million a year. I think there were some trade rumblings, this summer. I don't think it ever really got serious, but I do think he's a guy that, at some point or another is going to say, not ask for a trade, but just say, I'd like an opportunity to win.
Yeah. And here's the thing though, Frank. So let's say you trade Logan Couture, you're going to have to retain salary at some point. So
he would be their last retained salary transaction. FYI, I was going to mention this at some point.
Yeah, they only have one left. So if you're going to
Karlsson is chewed up for the next 4 years. So when there was the talk of a third-party team being involved in this Karlsson trade, the big thing that teams balked at was the idea of not wanting to touch Karlsson's dead cap money because they didn't want that tied up for 4 years.
Yeah, I get it. So it's it's tough for them because let's say at this year's deadline, they want to make a trade. They can only retain salary on one guy just to try to make a deal work, right? Like Mike Hoffman, for instance. So,
but at least Hoffman or whoever.
Yeah, he would be off the books.
They'd come off at the end of the year, but
they can only do one. That's my point, right?
And
then if they do, and then Karlsson says, hey, I want to trade next year. Well, then next year they couldn't even retain salary at the deadline.
Correct.
So yeah, they're not it's, my numbers on like a true rebuild's 8 years. The Sharks are 4 years in, Frank, and I think they're just starting the rebuild, to be honest.
But that's kind of what I'm saying. Are they? I know this sounds like a ridiculous thing to ask, but I don't know that they've really even ripped off the Band-Aid yet.
Well, if they aren't, I'm sorry for Sharks fans, because it's going to be pain for quite some time there. I don't see how the Sharks, I don't see how they're competitive next year when I look at their blue line. I just don't see how.
It feels like the misery is just extending.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
but I'm curious to see how Karlsson plays on a different blue line. Like, they gave him carte blanche to do what he wanted. The risk profile, there was none, because he was their engine. They don't care if they give up 6 goals as long as they score 7.
Yeah. But you know what? The funny thing is,
that's not going to work in Pittsburgh.
No, but look at the Sharks 5-on-5 numbers with Karlsson on the ice. They was like +7. With Karlsson off the ice, they were like -55 or 54. I don't know the exact number off my head, but it was a significant difference.
Okay. But all I'm saying is put him on a team with a different risk profile. And the Penguins have been under Mike Sullivan, pretty lenient, getting the good out of Chris Letang and accepting the bad, accepting the odd pizza served up the middle of the ice every now and again. But now you're doubling the risk.
At times, I think you will. I think, Letang's smart enough. He's won 3 cups. I think he kind of knows when he has to go. And maybe Chris Letang says, hey, you know what? I'm 36. Maybe I can be more of a defensive role, right? So I'm assuming they're going to play like Graves with Karlsson and, Letang with Peterson, or vice versa. I'm assuming that's what it's going to be. Kind of, each offensive guy with a defensive-minded defender.